Join me for a snarky wrap-up. I snark, therefore I am. Aloha and welcome back to my channel. I'm Marilyn, or Maya, or both, the baby boomer booktuber. And this was a tough month for me, September. I've had a lot of bad stuff happen, let's put it that way. So, and in addition to that, I haven't read any 5-star books, and I wasn't able to participate in many of the September readathons, though I did add in one at the end. So the books that I did read were a little mediocre. Some were better than others, and some I already wrapped up in my Friday reads. But let's get on to it. My first book is the Low-Carb Mediterranean Cookbook. This is a new book. It's not even on Goodreads yet. It's by Michelle Dudash, who's a Lebanese nutritionist, R.D.N. And I got it from my local library. And come on, low-carb Mediterranean? Like they used to say in the 80s commercial, where's the beef? I say, where's the pasta, the rice? Okay, it's really a beautiful book. The pictures are just, gorgeous. I'll give you an idea. This is tabbouleh salad with chickpeas and quinoa, so it does have some starch in it. And like I said, the book is just beautifully photographed, which I appreciated. And here is kale salad with blueberries and feta. This is a no for me. I don't like feta cheese. And I do like fruit with salads, and I do like kale salad, but this is not a good combination for me. What about you? Then there's my favorite, which was white bean and vegetable minestrone. But if you know anything about Italian minestrone, they have those little macaronis that they put inside, and if I do this, that's what I'll do. So, but the recipe looks really delicious. One thing that I don't like about a low-carb diet, I suffer from peripheral artery disease, and I'm not supposed to eat too much what I call flesh. But I eat fish and sometimes chicken, but this would be too much fish for one person. And this is salmon, which is good for the heart, but not in those, that's the problem with, when you take out one of the food groups, you end up eating more of the other food group. And I already don't eat, red meat and milk. I have lactose intolerant for milk, and I just stopped eating red meat because of my heart. But this is, I would just say that this would be a great book if you added a little starch to it. Then I read, well, that was the one I read this month, the beginning of the month, and I already talked about the Nakano Thrift Shop by Hiromi Kawakami. And this is a book that's not for everyone. It's sort of a coming-of-age story, and the characters are very socially awkward, as my friend Margaret Pinard said, but I really enjoyed it. I was able to get through the lines and see how they got through life being socially awkward and having to go through what they had to go through. And I really like this book. So if you've been to Japan or you're into Japanese culture, then this book might be for you. If not, it might not be. Sean the Book Maniac said he wasn't a fan of Hiromi Kawakami, but I haven't read anything else by her, so I gave this 4 stars. And then I talked about the last, in my Friday reads, I also talked about Morningside Heights by Joshua Henkin. And I felt this book was doing too much. It was too fast-paced. But I finished it, and it was about a man who was a professor, and he has early onset Alzheimer's. And I found the story to be quite heart-wrenching, but I just couldn't get into the characters because of the pacing. But I think I gave this 3.5 stars. And then I read Prairie Fires, and I said I had sort of skimmed, but I went back and I read the whole thing, and I still have the same feelings about it. So this is The American Dreams of Laura Ingalls Wilder by Caroline Frasier, and it's a tome, and it's all about the life of Laura Ingalls Wilder, who wrote the Little House on the Prairie books, and her relationships and how her life was much harder than was shown in her books and in the television program show with Michael Landon. But what I really enjoyed was her relationship with her daughter. She had one daughter, and her daughter was, they had a difficult relationship, and her daughter went to Paris in the 20s, and it was a very different life from what she was brought up with. And she also did writing books together with her mother and kind of taking advantage of her mother, and it's interesting. So if you're a Laura Ingalls Wilder fan, this is for you. If you're not, then I don't suggest it. I gave it 3 stars. Okay, now for the snark. No, this actually was finished last month. It will be here, and it's called Lillian, Boxfish Takes a Walk. And I had some issues with it, let's put it that way. So this is the setup. It's the last day of 1984, and 85-year-old Lillian Boxfish is about to take a walk. And what a walk it was. She did a half marathon at 85. I don't know how many 85-year-olds can walk a half marathon, but good for her. As she transverses a grittier Manhattan, a city anxious after attack by a still-at-large subway vigilante, she encounters bartenders, bodega clerks, chauffeurs, security guards, bohemians, criminals, children, parents, and parents-to-be, and surprisingly moments of generosity and grace. While she strolls, Lillian recalls a long and eventful life that included a brief reign as the highest paid advertising woman in America, a career cut short by marriage, motherhood, divorce, and a breakdown. And it says it's a love letter to city life and love letter to Manhattan, and I agree with that. I don't agree with a lot of the other things that were said. Kathleen Rooney wrote this book, and she did a lot of research into the real Lillian Boxfish, and her name was Margaret Fishback, and she really was the highest paid advertising copywriter, started as a copywriter at Macy's. And this is brought up numerable times in the book, too many times. I was so tired of hearing Macy's. In fact, I have my aunt who's 97 worked in Macy's for like 40 years. So I know quite a lot about Macy's, and I know a lot about New York. All right, so she paints a portrait across the changing America from the Jazz Age and the onset of the AIDS epidemic and the Great Depression to the birth of hip-hop. What she didn't talk about was how dangerous New York really was in 1984. This takes place on New Year's Eve of 1984, and Lillian is walking to a restaurant and going over her whole life, and it does go on and on and on. I really didn't like that part. Let me just say, like I said, I appreciate the author, and I'm a little scared of the author because she lurks on Goodreads, and I saw her. So if you're out there, Lillian, Kathleen, I appreciate what you were trying to do. I really do. And I know as an author, anybody who writes a book, it's not an easy task. But I have to be honest, and I felt that the author's voice was too much. The younger voice was too much in Lillian's head, and I didn't believe that this was a lot of times, most of the time, I didn't believe that this was an 85-year-old woman. I felt that she was going on about publishing and feminism and different topics that maybe the author was more interested in than maybe Lillian was at the time. And also Lillian was not a likable character, which can be okay, but a book of this length, yeah, I really didn't enjoy it. Yeah, so it wasn't realistic. There was a lot in it. There was, you know, Lillian spends some time in a mental sanatorium, as they call them. And I know a little bit about this because I have relatives who were in sanatoriums in the 50s. And that kind of came out of nowhere. I couldn't connect with the character who was going through this mental illness, even though she was talking about it, but I didn't believe it. There was a lot of little poems throughout the, you know, jingles that the real Lillian Boxfish wrote. I don't know if these are the actual jingles that she wrote. Let's put it this way. There was just too much in this book, too much to cover. And yeah, so I gave it 3 stars because I'll tell you why. What I liked about the book was the history that the author showed us about New York. And I think I mentioned this the last time, that the Empire State Building, when it went up, you know, they were trying to, you know, fill it with businesses, and it was called the Empty State Building. And that was interesting. And you know, she goes through the history of New York and like the 21 Club, why it was called that, you know, what it was called before, and different places that I was familiar with. So I wish she would have talked about the real woman's life rather than do a fictional story about it. That's what I would have liked. But like I said, it's still a 3-star book. At the ending, you know, she was kind of robbed and talked herself, well, maybe I shouldn't tell you, you know, all about it. I don't know if that's a spoiler or not. I don't think so. Yeah, she has a lot of unbelievable encounters. And what I was going to say was, I wasn't in New York in 1984, but I was there in the 70s, and I know that it was a dangerous place to be. And you know, she comes up with the vigilantes, and yeah, there was that, but there was also what came before it, and what came before the vigilantes was a lot of people getting murdered. You know, really, really a bad place to live in the 70s, in my opinion, in my experience. But yeah, so I enjoyed it up to a point. So please forgive me, Kathleen Rooney, if you're reading this. She did do a Goodreads comment, and she said, I'm the author, so I think it's a good book. So good for her. I was told that I should leave this last book alone, just go along for the ride. But since it's a snarky video, I can't. And that's The Bookshop on the Shore by Jenny Colgan. And she's a New York Times best-selling author of, I guess you would call it cozy chick lit and a women's fiction. And I have to say she's a good writer. And I got to the end, so it's not a DNF. But I had some issues. Okay. This is a story about, the premises, okay, let me give you my best stab at what this book is about. So, it's a bookshop, all right, or a book van, but okay, so a half-starved single mother in a London bedsit with a loser ex-baby daddy, gets help from his sister to get a job in Scotland, basically, working with books. She has a son who has selective mutism or delayed language, and that's the setup of the book. And I really like the beginning of it. Her ex is named Jazz, and Jazzender. I think he's a South Indian, and he's a wannabe DJ artist, and he's not taking care of her in any way, and she's beat down, you know, and doesn't know what to do next. She can barely feed her child. So I like that setup. I thought it was a good setup. And from the beginning, he finally tells his sister that he has a child, and the child is like 4 years old. And the sister takes charge and gets her, Zoe, a job in Scotland working with a friend of hers who has like a bookmobile. That's the way I can, you know, say it in American language, in American speech. Okay, so I like the beginning. All right, so then it took a strange turn for me. She gets to this big spooky house. Okay, so the spooky house reminded me of Turn of the Key, or, you know, you go to a place that you don't know, and there's a big spooky house with a child, and the child hisses, "We don't want you here," she hissed. So that was like, what, The Exorcist or something? I don't know, a book that I don't want to read. Then it turns into something like Rebecca with the housekeeper that doesn't like her. She's from London. And then it turns into, then she changes. Okay, then there's action, and then it changes into, then she meets the children of this single father who has a wife that nobody knows what happened to her. Like I said, Rebecca. And there's action. They get into trouble. They're kind of like kids who had no, they call her Nanny Number 7, you know. Okay, I'll stop here and just say that the writing, although it's really written well and engaging, has a lot of what writers call head hopping. You're in one point of view character, and then it goes into another point of view character. And I was saying, what? Okay, there's a lot of action, and she kind of turns from this introvert to taking charge. The lady that owns the bookmobile, I'll call it a bookmobile, has to be in the hospital. I really like that character, and we hardly ever hear from her again. And she goes to the hospital with preeclampsia, and then all of a sudden Zoe takes charge, and she becomes this kind of bossy person that I didn't like too much. And I mean, she's trying to like take charge and be, you know, like change the whole household into this dreary, spooky house into Mary Poppins, and everybody's going to be fine. And of course, you know, there's some subtlety here. I mean, with the little girl, and her son still doesn't speak. I'm not going to go into everything that happens, but this is what got me. And it started in page 227, but actually there's something that happens in chapter 22 that I will tell you about. It was a mistake, actually. Her husband visits, well, her ex-boyfriend decides to finally get his life together and visit his child. And this is like toward the end, it's like chapter 22. And I'll read you that later. But this one really got me. and it's page 220, and you see I'm already on 227 when I said, what? Okay, I'll read you the paragraph. I'll read you some of the paragraph. Zoe had been a cheerful, bookish child, not much given to introspection. If she had a bad day at school, she'd read the famous 5, where friendship was assumed and never questioned, etc., etc. And she talks about other books. And made up in her own lands. In short, she self-medicated with books. Now, as somebody who has self-medicated with books, I really enjoyed that. Then, and don't get me wrong, I like what she says, but we're in a fictional book. And she says, by the way, as the author of this novel and one who has herself always self-medicated with books, I cannot rightfully attest or deny whether this is a better way of dealing with real life than any other. In fact, as a reader, all writers are just readers one step to the side. I'm not actually sure I believe in this real life. I know it's a terrible betrayal to say this, but come on, aren't books, whisper it, quite a lot better in real life? And she goes on and on. If you're an author out there, no matter how good, no matter how wonderful you want to say this, don't do this. It took me completely out of the story. It was done a lot in Victorian novels and, Victober. And though she says something very important, and she really, this was her darling. They say, kill your darlings. This was her darling. And I wish she would have said it in the prologue, the afterlogue, but in the middle of chapter 1, well, it's chapter 1 of part 3. Don't do this. And then she says, so books are absolutely the thing in my opinion. As the old saying goes, whatever gets you through the night, which I should say is also books. Books get you through the night. I love this. But it's not in the story. And then she follows up with, so Zoe hadn't really had much experience. But no, it doesn't work. You can't just say so and go back into the story, because that took me right out of the story. Yeah, that was my big problem. Then there's a mistake. And it's on chapter 22. And I had to read it. I read pretty fast. I have to say I'm a fast reader. Then in chapter 21 of part 3, her boyfriend comes to visit the child. It seems that he has a girlfriend. So the whole chapter 21, he wants her to come back to London. So he came in. There's no hint of anybody else. And then he talks about his girlfriend. He met somebody. He wouldn't stop talking about the girl non-stop. Her name was Shanti. She was gorgeous. He showed pictures of her. Okay. And then 22, when Jaz and Shanti came in, did Shanti come in? She was supposed, he showed pictures of her. Was she with him? Was she at the hotel waiting? We don't know. So I don't know if this is a mistake, but I caught it anyway, and I think it should have been explained. And I won't get to the end of the book except to say that it turns kind of into a romance set in Scottish times, where there's a lot of festivals going on, and I was pretty bored at the end of the book. It's a pretty long book. It's 400 pages. Oh, this is I said no, it can't be 400 pages. It is a large print book, but it was long enough. It had too much in it, I think. But I would be willing to read something else that she wrote. I would be happy if she had been more into the bookmobile and the other woman who ran it, and more, not so much into so many different genres and different tropes. Yeah, because when you do that, you're apt to make a mistake, I know, as a writer. And maybe because I'm editing my own book right now, that I'm catching these things, or I'm annoyed by these things. But yeah, that really got me, you know. And maybe I should have just went with it as the, I don't know if she's my subscriber or not, or just a commenter, but she says, just know there's going to be a happy ending with Jenny Colgan. That's not enough for me. I want it to be understandable. I want it to be well written. I want to be able to, you know, root for the characters, or, you know, and I couldn't do that because of all the things that I've said. So I'm forced to give this 2 stars. But please tell me, you know, a lot of people always say on BookTube, this is only my opinion. If you love this book, I'm completely with you. Of course it's my opinion. And of course you have your own opinion about this author of this book. But I had to put in a little snark today, and I thought that maybe you would appreciate it. I hope so. Well, my last book it wasn't a 5-star, but it was a 4-star at least. And I read it on my Kindle. Kindle, where are you? There you are. I don't even know how to show a book on a Kindle, because then you have to open it and everything. But it was Shutter Island by Dennis Lehane. Lehane, I think his name is. And it was good for sub-genre, mid-March Mystery Madness sub-genre September. I don't know if I got that all right. It said that Dennis Lehane wanted to pay homage to B movies and 50s, and also Gothic, and also horror, and it's a thriller. And I'll say it real quick because it's also a movie, and I haven't watched the movie, but I thought it's about a marshal, a U.S. marshal, who was brought up on one side of this river that goes to Shutter Island. And his father was a fisherman, but he never really got his sea legs. And now he has to go over to Shutter Island because it's turned into a sanatorium, or for the criminally insane. It's not a prison, it's a hospital for the criminally insane, and a woman has disappeared. And all I'll say is it's quite the ride. It's not what you'd expect. I thought it was going to be about the woman, and then she turns out to kill everybody on the island or something like that. But it's much better than that. And all I'll say is that I really, really didn't expect how it was going to end, and I loved it, and I'd like to watch the movie. So that's the end of my snarky September wrap-up. I hope you enjoyed it, at least a little. I could have been snarkier, but like I said, I'm scared. No, I'm not really scared. But please like and subscribe and comment. And I'll be back for Victober with my haul for Victober. So until then, my friends, thank you so much for your well wishes about my daughter's boxer. I really appreciated that, and I read them all to her, and she appreciated that. So until we meet again, my friends, aloha.